Hello, everyone. We are going to wait a couple of minutes to start. I see that over 50 students are here. Wow, great. 2 more minutes and we are going to start. We'll wait for the others to arrive, okay? Okay, and it's 2 o'clock my time, GMT +2. So let's start this session. First of all, thank you very much for coming. You wouldn't believe it, but almost 1,000 students subscribed to attend this free workshop, and I'm very grateful to all of you. Let me start with sharing my screen. Here we go. Hopefully you should see my screen right now. This is where we are going to work in this session. So I'm very grateful for all of you who are attending. I see that over 70 people are here. This is my first ever live YouTube stream, so bear with me. As you can hear, my voice is almost gone, but I was eating honey and ginger all day, so hopefully I'll be able to hold the session. Very quickly, let's see what we are going to do in this session. I'm going to introduce myself very quickly. Then we'll go through some resources, and then paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3 questions, followed by a Q&A session at 3 o'clock my time. If you want to stay, you can ask me questions. I'll stay here and try and answer as many of these as I possibly can. So to start with the intro, my name is Daniel, also known as Econ Daddy. I've been an examiner since 2014 and an IB economics teacher since 2012. You can contact me via email, or I also have a Discord channel. And if you want to, please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to record this video, so once I put it up on my YouTube channel, if you hit the little bell icon, you're going to get a notification of this video. So one more thing, a disclaimer. I have to say this, that the content of this workshop is in no way connected with nor endorsed by the International Baccalaureate Organization. And although I am a contracted examiner at the IBO, I do not represent the organization. So all the advice that I'm giving you here in this free workshop is my unofficial advice. Yet I really hope that it's going to be very helpful. I see that over 100 people are here. It's amazing. Thank you very much, guys. So let's jump into it. This was my intro. I got, as I said, almost 1,000 students subscribing on my website. Most of you have come from TikTok, so a big shout out to IB Therapy on TikTok. Others have come from my newsletter list, yet others from the Discord channel of the IB. I got also hundreds of messages, especially when it comes to answering this question: what specific parts of the syllabus do you need help with? I have read them all. Okay, I got things like, I'm cooked. My teacher only showed up for grade 11 and left this year, leaving us to do cognitive. Someone else said that they need help with pretty much everything, considering my entire class is failing. Lots of questions about the theory of firm. And there were people who just simply said anything helps, thanks. So I'm with you. I feel you. Look at this. I need all the help I can get, thanks. In this session, I'll try and give you all the help I can give you. But of course, since this is a short 1 hour session, we are not going to be able to go into content. But in the Q&A session part, if you have questions about the content, feel free to ask them, and I'll try and reply to those as well. So let's jump into the resources. How can you best prepare for your IB economics exams? I'm specifically talking to those who are taking their exams in a couple of weeks. Very importantly, there could be some parts which are pretty obvious to you that you feel it's too basic, but trust me, there are lots of teachers who haven't shared these documents with their students. So we'll cover things in a lot of details. So the number one PDF document that you need to go to is the IB Economics Guide. I'm pretty sure most of you know about this, but trust me, there are students who have never even heard about this. I got this question: what is actually needed in exams? Now, my answer is very quickly, let's go into the IB Economics Guide. You scroll down to page 22. Look, page 22 here. And at the top, it should say syllabus. Now, everything that's in the table section is what you could get questions about in an IB exam situation. So if there is something that your teacher wants you to know, but it's not here, you don't need to know that. Let me just show you. Just this week, I had students asking me about decreasing returns to scale, or the short run shutdown rule, or average variable costs. Some teachers teach parts from the old syllabus that will not be in the exam anymore. However, everything which is in here could be part of the exam. Now, there are some teachers who say that the first unit, this introduction to economics, is not important. Let me tell you something. The last two words of this section, circular economy. This is the only part in the whole syllabus that the circular economy appears, and yet it has already been part of an exam question. Most students were confusing this with the circular flow of income, which is a completely different thing. So I suggest that if you really want to achieve a level 7, then you very thoroughly go through the IB Economics Guide, this syllabus section. It's so important that the textbooks are written based on these. Now, higher level students, anything which is bold, that's higher level stuff. So this is mostly for standard level students. The bolded parts you don't have to know. And one last thing about this is that AO3 is assessment objective 3, is the type of question that you could get in a paper 1 part B 15 marker question. That's the one that you can you will be asked to give real world examples to. So if I were you, I would very carefully go through all the assessment objective 3 questions. Obviously, it's not just higher level content. Here we go. There's a standard level assessment objective 3 question here, because obviously the standard level students will also get that part B 15 marker question in paper 1. And then one more thing, I really promise that this is the last thing in here. Many students don't know that if you scroll down all to the very end, or almost the very end, there's a part called glossary of common terms. These are the terms that the IB will use in exams. So again, back to the assessment objective 3 questions, especially the word discuss or evaluate, or to what extent the IB is giving you what they are expecting from you if the question is phrased with these common terms. So the number one document to go to is the IB Economics Guide. And of course, all these resources that I'm talking about here, I'm going to email to you, okay? So if you signed up to attend this workshop on my website, then I'm going to automatically email it to you. If you haven't signed up because you are coming from the Discord channel, for example, I'm going to put a link in the description of this video once it's out, and there you can sign up and request these resources. Next up, many students don't have a clue that the IB produced a document called Economics Assessed Student Work. In here, the IB is giving you real-world examples of students writing papers. Let me very quickly show you. I think it starts on page 7. Here we go. Standard level paper 1. There are 6 examples with IB marks and comments by the examiners. And you also have that for higher level paper 1. You also have it for standard level paper 2, paper 3 as well. Let me just show you. Here we go. Page 11, paper 3. And if you are a first year IB student, a lot of you have indicated that you're going to have the exams next year. There is a part with 5 different portfolios, IAs, also marked by the IB. So I think this is a fantastic resource. I got this question here. How do I know that I've written enough? So what I've done for you guys is I literally counted the words. The example 1 for SL paper 1, that student got 9 out of 10 for the part A. So I literally counted how many words that was, that essay. It was 395. So just under 400 was enough to get 9 out of 10. And that student's part B was 962 words. He or she got, I think, 14 out of 15. But I've also seen other top marks for part B's with words roughly about 850 words. We'll talk about the paper 1 later on, but this is just to give you an idea. I'm also going to send this over to all of you. Next up, I got lots of questions, of course, about the real world examples. Now, honestly, I feel like students are too worried about this. Of course, I'm never going to say that you could easily make up your own real world examples. Don't do that. I suggest you learn them. But the real world examples from your own knowledge only come up in the part B of your paper 1. Now, paper 1 only counts 20% of your overall mark if you're a higher level student and 30% if you're a standard level student. So overall, that part B question is the only one that's affected, and I don't think you have to be too stressed about it. Nevertheless, I guess you have heard that there is this year a pilot. There are open book exams in many schools with a given criteria for students to prepare a booklet for themselves, and that's exactly what I've also done. I've put together a real world example booklet that I myself would use if I could take the open book exams with lots of examples. The rules state that it must be 2 pages long maximum, and maximum 60 words per real world example, and the word count should be roughly 1,200. You can't even use bold. You see, I didn't do it accordingly. I'm using bold because otherwise it would be unreadable. But this real world example booklet hopefully will also help you. I'm going to send this over to you again free of charge. It's not an exhaustive list. It's not all the possible real world examples that there are, because we are limited by these 2 pages. This is simply what I would take with myself if I was writing the open book exams and answering paper 1. Okay, that's about the real world example. And by the way, I didn't say, but obviously right now the chat is off because there are lots of students here. But once we are at the Q&A session, of course, I'm going to open the chat, and it's going to be live. Next up, many students have never heard of the subject reports. These are the documents that the IB puts together based on the IB examiner's feedback for every single session. So I'm going to send over the May 2023 time zone 1, time zone 2 subject reports. If you open them up, you will see that they are giving you detailed recommendations even. So not just what the students found difficult, what the students found easy, but also recommendations, you see, and guidance for the teaching of future candidates. And not only for the IA, this is for the IA right now. Let me just show you very quickly. Higher level paper 1, there are general comments, and then question specific comments. But at the end, there's going to be recommendations and guidance for the teaching of future candidates. Very, very useful to read these. I have read these for you. So in this session, I'm going to show you the most important parts of these subject guides. Right. And then I got this one. I'm very bad at economics lingo, someone said. Okay. No one knows. Well, it's not true. A lot of students don't know that the IB prepared a glossary of subject-specific terms. Okay. So here we go. I'm not saying you would have to learn everything by heart, but for example, if something comes up like you don't know how to define infrastructure, right? Most people know what infrastructure is, but no one is able to define it. Then you can open this booklet up. You go to page 7, I think, and there you'll see that there is a, maybe I was wrong and it's page 9. There is a definition of infrastructure by the IB. Okay, infra, where is this? Here it is. Okay, large scale capital usually provided by the government that's necessary for economic activity to take place. So, it's a very useful document to learn from. I suggest to read it at least once, and then you can always check back at terms that you want to know better. Right, that's about the definitions. All of these documents I'll send over. Then I got this one. Most of the book contains so much information that can be abstained and does not actually help in the examination, how to know on what to focus. So number 1, I think you should just go back to the IB Economics Guide. And number 2, shameless self-promotion here. You can just check out my IB Economics revision notes, which are put together by me. And also I was trying to focus on what you really need to know. So I got lots of questions, for example, about the balance of payments. As I said, I'm not going to have time to go through content today, but let me just very quickly show you, okay, what balance of payments looks like in my notes. Here we go. To the point, concise explanations of what you actually need to know. And whenever I have a bit more to say, I have these little chat boxes. Let me just bring that to the middle. There we go, with somewhat more information. And if you still feel you're lost, you can always just start a video. You click on the play button. I should be appearing on the right-hand side corner. And there we go. I'm going to mute this for now. You can also speed it up and cover topics way faster than reading very long textbooks. Also, one more thing that I think you will like. I got lots of questions about the theory of the firm. Look at this. Okay, feel free to take a screenshot. I'll try and put this, here we go, up in the, maybe I'll just zoom out a bit. I'm not sure how much you can see that. Okay, feel free to take a screenshot about this. I have all the market structures compiled in this table sitting next to each other, of course, on top of explaining everything else you need to know in this board about oligopolies, monopolies, and the rest, okay, with short 3.5 minute long videos. So overall, I think it's the fastest and most efficient way to cover a lot of content in a small amount of time. Now, that's enough about that. You have the revision notes available on my website. You can find out more about it here on the econdaddy.com website. Also, continuing my sales pitch, okay, IB Economics Exam Revision Crash Course. I'm going to hold live interactive sessions in a couple of weeks. where we are going to practice questions that are likely to come up in the exams so that you ace the exams. So if you feel like you're okay with the content, but you really want to make sure that you get that 7, and you need a final push, I do recommend to come over to my exam revision crash course. We're going to spend 3 hours on paper 1, 3 hours on paper 2, 3 hours on paper 3 for higher level students, and I'm going to have a Q&A session. Also, very importantly, here are the dates. I don't want to waste the time too much with this. You can see it right now. There's also a link to my website. You can check out the schedule here, okay, for the standard level course, for the higher level course. That's it. As I said, I don't want to waste too much time with this. Very importantly, if you come to this course, I'm going to give you access to all my revision notes, plus I'm going to give you 30 worked out paper 1 essays, and I'm going to mark and give feedback to a full mock exam right before the exams. Plus, of course, you can attend the sessions, and I'm going to answer all your questions live in these interactive sessions. All of these are going to be recorded as well. So if you can't make it because of time zone problems, you will be able to view them later. I'm going to give you a promotion code. This is going to expire Monday. So exam hack 25. You go onto my website, you click on the sign up, and then on the Stripe, you just very quickly put in exam hack and then exam hack 25, and then it should take off 25% from the course. There you go. I don't want to waste too much time on this. Let me just continue. I think you get the idea. Very quickly, if you want just papers to be marked by me, I mark a paper for 75 euros. And if you feel like you need more private tutoring, just get in touch with me. I'll try and squeeze you in somewhere. I'm pretty much fully booked. But that's it. It's about my self-promotion. Thank you very much for listening. Believe me, I really, truly believe that these notes and the exam crash course will indeed help you a lot in your preparation for the exams. Otherwise, I wouldn't be talking about it. Right, next up, we are going to go through paper 1 and what you need to do in your paper 1 answers. After that, we also go through paper 2. You see there's quite a lot of things here. And finally, paper 3. Now, jumping into paper 1. The duration is 1 hour, 15 minutes, 30% at standard level, 20% at higher level. Very importantly, as I said earlier on, the part B question will include evaluation. And you have to do both part A and part B of the same question, please, okay? There are always students who do part A of question 1 and then part B of question 2. Don't be that student. I know it sounds very dumb, but every time there are students who do that. In that case, the examiner has to mark the answer. Maybe the student gets 8 out of 10 for part A, and then let's say for part B of question 2, they get 10 out of 15. And then the system will see that question 2 got 10 marks, question 1 got 8 marks. So question 2 is more. So the student gets 10 marks overall out of the 25. So choose a question and then do both A and B. Let it be the first one, the second one, or the third one, please. Okay. Next up, looking at the part A, level descriptors, obviously focusing on what to do to get the highest marks. The specific demands of the question are understood and addressed. Relevant economic theory is fully explained. Relevant economic terms are used appropriately throughout the response, and where appropriate, relevant diagrams are included and fully explained. Now, let me show you how to structure such a paper 1 essay. Very importantly, you shouldn't waste too much time on your part A. Okay, I even have it here. Okay, don't waste too much time on your part A, simply because the part B is way more important. So the first thing you do is definitions, as would many teachers say. However, it's no longer true that you have to start listing your definitions. Many teachers still don't know and say to students that you have to start with all the definitions. No, the use of effective and appropriate terminology is what's important. Descriptors no longer demand that candidates define terms, okay? Meaning that you don't have to define every single economic term right at the very beginning, okay? However, very importantly, of course, you can use definitions, and perhaps you should, for as the basis of your explanation. And as it says in the subject report, it's better not to list all the definitions in the introduction, but apply a relevant explanation. Now, what are the terms that I believe should be or could be defined? Okay, economic terms that are in the question and economic terms that are connected. So if you get a question about negative externalities of consumption, it would be a good idea to also explain what market failure is. And that explanation is kind of your definition, if you like. Second, once you're done with your intro, you're drawing a diagram or more. Very importantly, please double check that your diagrams are fully labeled, the axes and the curves. Every single year, many students lose marks because of incorrectly labeled diagrams or simply labels missing from curves. Also, your diagrams should be dynamic, meaning that there should be shifts of your curves. And then that should be followed by an explanation. And the explanation must be about, obviously, the economic theory that the question is asking, and it should be focused on that. Okay, so if you get a question about taxation, don't start talking about subsidies just because subsidies are also a form of government intervention, please. Okay, stick with what the question is asking. But very importantly, look at my part B here. Make sure to also explain what's going on in your diagram in detail, meaning the shifts of the curves, the changes in the values on the horizontal and vertical axes must be explained. Otherwise, there's just going to be a lonely diagram somewhere standing alone in your essay, not much explained, not connected to your essay. And in that case, you won't get full marks. You're not going to make it to the level 9-10 because your diagrams are included but not fully explained. Look, if there's no explanation, you could lose quite a lot of marks for your part A. I'm not saying that just because you don't have thorough explanations, you will immediately get down to 6, because it's a much more complex thing for an examiner to mark an essay. They take into consideration a lot of things, and then they determine which mark band your essay falls into. But I'm telling you, if your diagrams are not explained, you are very likely to lose quite a lot of marks. Okay, that's about the part A of paper 1. Part B, if you check out the level descriptor, has 2 more bullet points. I'm sure most of you already know that the response has to contain evidence of effective and balanced synthesis or evaluation, and also the real world examples that have to be not only identified, but fully developed to support the argument. Let's have a look at how I would structure such an essay. Of course, in this case, that's what's more important, the 15 markers. So you would spend at least 45, 50 minutes on it, and you should be writing more than double the amount of words for the part B than the part A. This is so much more important. Many students waste half their time in the paper 1 trying to make the part A perfect, and then they are left without time to do their evaluation, and they score very low points because of the lack of time to finish it off. So don't worry too much about the part A. In 400 words, you should be fine. But for part B, do take the time to write it out completely. The first part should be an introduction in which you should refer back to A. It's going to be the same examiner marking your part B as the one who marked the part A. So of course you can refer back to the definitions or diagrams that you've already explained in part A. Don't waste the time with that. But also, very importantly, in your intro, make sure you have a thesis statement. The thesis is a short answer to the question, which also serves as an outline to your essay. What does that mean? It means that it's going to have all the parts, all the points that you make to justify your answer. And it's kind of a guideline to you, because once you have a perfected thesis statement, then you will know what to write about. And you just simply follow that plan that you set out in your thesis, and you will have a very nicely structured paper one response. Diagrams must be fully labeled dynamic, and very importantly, if you really want to achieve the highest grades, you should integrate data from the real world examples into your diagrams. The explanation should also be about, obviously, the economic theory and your diagrams, plus the real world examples. Please don't leave the real world examples to the very end, okay? You can and you should start explaining in the body of your essay your real world examples, and make sure to develop them. And then finally, of course, there's the evaluation. Now, I know that evaluation in my structure is the last one, but that's not to say that you couldn't perhaps answer the question in a way with diagram, explanation, and then an evaluation. And perhaps if you're talking about an alternative policy, then you'll have yet another diagram, yet another explanation, and then yet another part for the evaluation. Okay, so this is the structure of what should be there in your essay. How you play with these parts is up to you, but I'm telling you that these parts you should have in that paper one part B to get close to maximum marks. Now, for your evaluation, make sure you prioritize your arguments. This means that you say the most important benefit of this policy or whatever else is this, the second, blah, blah, blah. Also, very importantly, don't forget about your real world examples. And you can usually use at least 2 of the below. So if you feel like you're freezing up during the exam, you don't know what to write about, but you can remember these 4 things: pros versus cons, stakeholder effects, short run versus long run effects, and efficiency. I'm telling you, most of the times you can use at least 2 of these. And so if it comes to you that, okay, I can talk about the stakeholders, and then you think about it, and perhaps there are consumers, producers, the government, or society as a whole, then there is something to write about in a meaningful way. So that's your evaluation. Okay, make sure you prioritize your arguments, still use or keep using your real world examples, and choose 1 or most preferably 2 of these to build your evaluation about. Very importantly, I have also collected all the assessment objective 3 questions or topics from the IB syllabus so that you don't have to. And I'm going to show you all of these right now. We don't have time to read these out, but I'm going to show you very quickly. Later on from the video, you can just stop the video and check these out. These are the parts from the syllabus which are assessment objective 3. And so, for example, if you're a standard level student looking through the microeconomics section of the syllabus, you will find that you only have, 5 major topics. 1 for the PED, a pretty large one for the government intervention, and then externalities, common pool resources, and finally public goods. And that's it. These are the topics, if you're a standard level student, that the IB can ask questions from when it comes to the paper 1 part B, if you're a standard level student. 5 major topics. Hint, hint. Next up, looking at the macro questions. Somewhat more questions here for standard level students, but for higher level students, if you check these against the micro questions, you will see that there are a little bit less of these questions overall. Okay, so zooming back to the supply side policies, hopefully you can read this. Okay, and finally, very quickly to show you that I've done my homework for this session. I was really trying hard to make sure that I'm giving you useful information. These are the ones that you could get questions for in paper 1, part B, in the global economics question. Okay, right. With that said, let's jump over to the last thing I have for paper 1, and that's the overall comments. First off, please plan your essays, especially the part B. Lots of students just start writing everything they know, and it's not really working out. Many students who don't prepare a plan lose the thread of what they are saying. You have 75 minutes, it's quite a lot of time. Try and make a plan. Then, please read the question and keep your focus on the question, carefully considering what it's asking, and avoid simply writing down everything you know about a topic, because what you write needs to be relevant. Next, diagrams. Once again, draft them clearly and label them fully. Both the axes and the curves. Show arrows to have the examiner, okay? It's much easier and simpler to see which way the curves shift if you can see arrows. A diagram that doesn't show anything happening is unlikely to be useful. What does that mean? Shifts are needed most of the times. Provide an explanation, as I said, and modify the generic labeling to better correspond to the explanations. Specific data points identified in the real-world examples should be integrated into the diagrams, okay, if you really want to score high marks. Also, yet another exam tip. When the Part B question includes the words best or always, then provide alternatives, because most likely a given policy that you have to evaluate might not always be the best option for a given government. And finally, a few points for the real-world examples. Make sure you use real-world examples and try to integrate them into the synthesis sought by the question, but starting in your explanation. To achieve the highest marks, go beyond simply stating facts and try to use what you know about your example to develop the discussion. And finally, the RWE, the real world example, should not only be just at the very end of part B, but throughout the response. This is my overall advice to the paper 1 exams. And let's jump over to the paper 2. Those who come to my course, I'm telling you, will practice a lot of these questions. Paper 2 has several questions, and good news to everyone, especially to higher level students, it's going to exclude the higher level extension material and topics. So it's going to be the exact same paper this year and from this year onwards for standard level and higher level students. And as you can see, there are quite a few questions. Let me show you. This is something I've put together here. This is going to be the structure of your paper 2. Importantly, you have an hour and 45 minutes, so it's even longer than your paper 1. Now, you're going to choose from 2 questions, question 1 and question 2. Please don't try to solve all of these questions. Let me zoom out so that it appears well in the screen. There we go. Okay, so you don't do all of both questions. Please choose one question. How do you choose your question? By looking at the part G questions first. Many students skip that and simply go to the definitions and they say, oh, great, I know the definitions, I'm going to stick with this question. And then it turns out they don't really know what to say in the part G. So first of all, in the 5-minute reading time that you're going to be given for all exams, make sure that you check the part G questions and then move up with the questions. You check out question F, E, D, C, and so on, okay? And then you make a decision about which one to do. Once you have made that decision, then you can go on to start reading the text. But once the writing time starts, I suggest you jump over to the questions and do them. My suggestion is not to spend more than 45 minutes on the first short response questions. I really think it's doable even in less time. And so here's my advice about these. For part A, definitions, the advice is to just learn the definitions, okay? I'm not saying that you can only define a term in the exact same way as it's in that document, very importantly, of course, you can use your own terms, own words, not own terms, but your own words. But as long as your economic terms are used correctly in the definition, you should be getting 2 marks. So that glossary of the IB economics terms that I've shown you up here, this is just a guidance. Okay, these questions, these definitions would get 2 out of 2, but of course you can use your own words slightly differently. You would still get 2 out of 2 if you're using economic terminology appropriately. For part B, learn the calculations, learn also how to read data and how to draw diagrams. Sometimes it's just to one of the questions here is to draw a diagram. You can lose marks if you forget the labeling. Many students do that every single year. Don't be that student. And for the calculations, at the end of the session, I'm going to show the formulas because I have also collected all of these for you guys. I got lots of requests in those messages for formulas. Okay, so for part C and F, pretty much the most important section of this paper 2 before the part G, these 4-mark questions, make sure that you know these diagrams and what can cause a shift of the curves in these diagrams. I also collected one by one all the topics for which you have specific diagrams. Make sure you know what they look like, what the axes are, and what could drive the curves up or down, and how would the intersections change and affect the values on both axes. Also, very importantly, agile diagrams are not included. Okay, so don't worry about the paper 2. You're not going to get a question about the Phillips curve because it's agile content. That's about the short questions. Okay, also one very important point here to make. Please, I'm begging you, don't write a whole page on a part C, D, E, or F. Okay, draw the diagram and then write 3, 4, maximum 5 sentences about it, and that should be enough. Lots of students waste precious time by writing way too much more than what they should for these questions. It's 4 marks altogether. Most usually you would get 2 marks for the diagram, 2 marks for your explanation. No need for more than 4 or 5 sentences maximum, okay, for these 4 markers. And then finally, for part G, or for paper 2, the most difficult question, if you ask me, in the whole IB economics exams, the 15-marker question of the paper 2. But the good news is that you have a lot of time to do this, because if you really don't spend more than that 45 minutes I told you, then you should have roughly 60 minutes to make a plan and then write a very, very nice essay. If you check out these level descriptors, you will see that these are almost completely identical to that of paper 1 part B. However, the last one is no longer about a real-world example. Instead, it's the use of information from the text data being appropriate, relevant, and used to formulate a reasoned argument supported by analysis and or evaluation. This means you have to refer back to the source. That's the reason why the IB was giving you these sources, usually quite a lot of text and then at least 2 tables. So how to tackle that question? Just like for the part B and also part A of paper 1, start by making a plan. Also, very importantly, if you check the subject reports, examiners of paper 2 say that you should use definitions here, as opposed to the paper 1. They don't require you to start right with your definitions. If you check out what they say in the subject reports, it's coming up all the time that they want you to do a short introduction, and they say, although not specifically required, defining the key terms of the question would help the students focus on its demands and show the examiners that they understand how to use these appropriately. So if the question is asking about economic growth and or economic development, which is sometimes the case. I can't tell if it's going to be like this, but sometimes they do have questions in the paper too. Then I suggest you learn what these are, how these are related, how to define them, why economic growth can lead to economic development. In what circumstances could it happen that economic growth occurs but no economic development? Or how is it possible to have economic development but no economic growth? So those would be very nice in your introduction. And as you can see, they are requiring you to do a short introduction. Yet again, I suggest that once you are done with this explanation of these key terms, you should also have a thesis statement, just like in the part B of paper 1, followed by diagrams. And here's one more a very important thing, especially when you're making a plan, by the way. Again, if you feel like you're stuck and you're freezing up and you don't really know what to write about, how to make the plan, a very, very useful tip is to check back at the earlier questions. Look, you had quite a lot of questions. 4 of them usually include diagrams as well. And the IB was asking you these from the source. Why? Because the IB thinks that these are important. So you should also think that these are important when it comes to answering your part G question. So it's a good idea to stop for a sec when you're making the plan and when you're trying to put together this thesis statement and check back at what questions or at the questions that you have answered so far. And the good thing about these is that they all refer back to the text or the data in the tables. So I do suggest that if you are writing the plan, go back and check those. So for the diagrams, please include diagrams. I forgot to say it for the paper 1 because I think it's so obvious. Sorry about that. That almost always there is a room for a diagram. Okay, there are very few topics in the whole syllabus where you don't have to draw diagrams. Okay, so discussing the importance of national income statistic when you are trying to measure living standards, maybe in that case you don't have to draw a diagram, but I would say 95% of the cases you would need to draw diagrams. And here too, in the paper 2 part G question, draw diagrams or refer back to the diagrams that you have already drawn. Make use of these. And then in your explanation, please answer the question. Very, very important. Let me give you an example here as well. Very quickly. Here's the question I came up with, very similar to what you're going to get, at least when it comes to the structure. It says using info from the source, which is the text and of course the data in the tables, and your understanding of economic theory. Evaluate the effectiveness of the Brazilian government's macroeconomic policies in promoting economic growth and economic development. Now, many students mistakenly would start writing about possible policies of the Brazilian government that the government could be using. But the question is not asking you to come up with policies. The question is asking you to evaluate the effectiveness of the Brazilian government's macroeconomic policies, which are in the text. So you shouldn't come up with policies of your own here and start talking about these made up policies, because that's not what the question is about. So please very carefully read the question to make sure you understand what you have to do. If the question was something like evaluate the effectiveness of the possible macroeconomic policies that the government could use, then of course you can come up with your own policies. But if the question is so focused on what's actually in the text, don't start making up your own policies, because then the examiners will simply look at your essay and they will say for most of it that it's irrelevant because it's not answering the question. So please read the question and make sure you completely understand it. Also, make sure you explain what's going on in your diagram, and very, very importantly, refer back to the data or the text at least 4 or 5 times. Now, I want you to make these references explicit, such as in a bracket, as in text B, paragraph 2. Why? Because we want to make it easy for the examiner to see that, aha, there is a reference back to the source. As you can see from the way the question is phrased, you should use the information from the source. So if you don't, we lose a lot of marks, and you have to make it very clear to the examiner that you are now referring back to the source, the data, or the text. So make use of the tables also, please. There will be two, usually, so far that's the way it goes, there will be two tables. One usually focuses on economic growth related data, the other one most usually about economic development related data. Make sure that you also refer back to those values in the table. It's very useful. And then you go on with your evaluation, which will be quite similar to that of the paper one, but I'm giving here an extra tip again for you guys. I really hope that it's going to be useful to all of you. I wrote here, is the provided text or data enough to draw conclusions and make strong judgments? So if you feel like the question in part G wants you to make judgments or draw conclusions based on data that you don't find enough, then you can make a reference, especially in your conclusion, to this problem that, in order to make more well-established judgments, one might need to get access to more data. For example, if the text is about a less developed country and how much it's important for them to invest into infrastructure because it has been destroyed by a catastrophe, then you could say that, well, it would be nice to know how much the expected costs of that infrastructure project would be. Let's say if a bridge collapses like it has happened in the US. So then we need estimations about how much it would cost. If the source you're given does not include that data, then it's going to be hard for you to make a well-established judgment about that, so that you can refer to in your evaluation as well. And I think that will make it super, super strong. So that's it about the structure of the part G question. As I said, try and spend a whole hour on it, plan it out, and write it up very, very nicely with diagrams, explanations referring back to the source, and an evaluation. Also, as I said, for part B, you can have a point explained with a diagram and then evaluated, and then again another one. Here it could be that you are talking about several policies, for example, just like in this question. So I'm not saying that you have to have a separate part at the very end for your evaluation. What I'm saying is that you have to have an evaluation. Final tips for the for the paper 2. As I said, make a plan, and as I said, also check the previous questions. Also read the question and stay focused on the question. And the specific data points identified in the RWEs, I have to change that. It's about the text, okay? In the source, here we go. Or sources should be integrated into your diagrams if you possibly can. And then don't forget to evaluate, and please, please do refer back to the data and make these references very, very clear, very explicit, so that the examiners will know that you are now using the source. And this is what I have to say about your paper 2. Next up, we have paper 3. So standard level students, if you feel like you want to go, feel free to go. But at the end of the session, I'm going to have a Q&A part. So if you want to stay, feel free to stay. It's going to take a couple of minutes to go through the paper 1 questions for higher level students. Paper 3 is 1 hour 45 minutes, and please answer all questions. Here, you are not allowed to choose between question 1 and question 2. You have to answer both of the questions. The structure of the paper 3 is that there are lots of short questions, most usually calculations and short answers, and then a policy recommendation question. First, looking at what you need to do for these calculations. First of all, how much time you should spend on these. I think 25 minutes roughly should be enough to answer these questions. My suggestion is to spend 25 minutes on these shorter questions and another 25 on the essay. And then you jump over to the second question, yet again, 25 on the short questions, 25 on the long final essay, because overall you have 105 minutes. So that's about 50 minutes per question. So if you kind of half it, it's going to work out pretty well. First of all, write down the formula, especially for PED, PES, YED, or percentage calculations. This way you can minimize your errors. Also, please round your numbers to 2 decimal places, okay? Not 3, not 4, and not 1, 2 decimal places. If you don't know how to round up a number, no problem. I have it here. If the third decimal is 5 or higher, you add 1 number to the second decimal. Otherwise, you leave it unchanged. I know it's grade 5 mathematics, but I'm telling you, some students struggle with this. So 2 decimal places for all numerical answers. Always check the units, okay? Whether you're providing the dollars or the kilograms or whatever else is in the question in your final answer. This is not required in the working. So when you are working out your answer, you don't need to put the units in. But for the final answer, you have to, otherwise you're going to lose a mark. Not doing so, yeah, will cost you a mark. Not per question, will cost you a mark for the whole exam. In the past, it used to be per question. Don't get fooled by the thousands or millions. Also, it refers to the units. In some cases, on the quantity axis, you might see that it's given in thousands of kilograms or millions of kilograms or packs or whatever. Make sure again that at the very end, you add these thousands or millions to your final answer. It's, as I said, okay to add these to the very end or at the very end. So in your workings, feel free to not add those thousands, millions, but for the final answer, don't forget about them. Very important, because again, you can lose a mark. Also, make sure to double check the currency. It's not always US dollars, okay? In quite a few paper 3s, it's no longer US dollars because they are not looking at the American markets. Also, if you ever see rate, it means you will need a percentage. Rate is a percentage. Think of it: inflation rate, unemployment rate, economic growth rate. These are all percentages. And of course, make sure you know how to calculate the percentage change. If you don't know, I'm going to show you. Look, very, very quickly. The percentage change in quantity is the second value minus the first divided by the first times 100, okay? Make sure you know how to calculate percentage changes. I'll also show you these formulas in a sec. Okay, going on. Elasticity values are numbers. There are no units needed, okay? So PD, PS, or YD values are just numbers. Change is always new minus old. Many times the question will ask you to calculate the change, let's say in consumer expenditure, okay? They don't say whether it's a decrease or an increase. You have to tell the examiner. And perhaps if the new value is lower than the old one, then if you follow this structure, new minus old, then you will get a negative number, which you should if there has been a decrease in the consumer expenditure in that question. So make sure it's always new minus old for any change calculations. Also, whenever you use price in a calculation, the final answer will be dollars or Indian rupees or whatever, really euros maybe, whatever the currency is in the question. So price in the calculation means currency will be the units. Also, shortage or a surplus is always units, okay? Most usually kilograms or tons, okay? Not price or not a currency. Also, please label your diagrams. And a large number of students always lose marks here. Just double check it, okay? Do I have all the labels for the axes? Do I have all the labels for the graphs, the curves? If you do, then it's all good, okay? And very importantly, yet another way to lose marks. Lots of students lose marks like this. Refer to the data in the explanations when the exercise asks for it. Many of the 2 and mostly the 4-mark explanation questions require you to refer back to the data in a previous question. Okay, sometimes that's given, sometimes you had to calculate it. If the question asks for such a reference, do not forget to incorporate that in your answer. Otherwise, you will lose marks, especially for theoretical questions where you have to explain a theory in a couple of sentences and you forget to refer back to the data. If there are no numbers in that answer, you will lose marks. And of course, try and stay in the box provided, because you will have additional answer sheets if you need so. With all that, let's jump over to, as I said, I'm going to show you the calculations in a sec. Let's jump over to the policy recommendation questions, what you need to do and what you don't need to do. So, as I said, you should be able to answer an essay question like this in roughly 25 minutes, maybe half an hour. Please identify a single policy. Many students write down 5 different policies. Examiners have to choose the best explanation and then only give marks for that policy alone. That's how you can easily end up with only 3 marks. So you stick with one policy that you identify, and you only introduce another one if it's complementary. So if your policy recommendation is to increase the taxation, then you can talk about using the extra tax revenues to invest into education. That's accepted and that's okay. But then there has to be a very strong link in between these 2 policies. But my suggestion is to try and keep your focus on one policy that you identified. Then you explain the policy. Very importantly, you explain, even if it's very, very basic, you explain why it will achieve the macroeconomic goal that the question is asking for. Even if you feel it's very dummy, you have to write it down as if you were talking to a 10-year-old kid. And finally, evaluate the policy. Okay, what does that mean? It means you need to talk about, most usually, the pros and cons, the advantages and the limitations of that policy. My other suggestion here is that once you identified your policy, read the source again, underlining, here we go, underlining the relevant parts, and make sure that you use the text and data from the source at least 4 or 5 times here, just like in your part G of paper 2, in a meaningful way to support your argument. Okay, don't just throw in numbers randomly. Try and think a little bit about it. As I said, 4 or 5 times is more than enough. Actually, 3 would do the job, but make use of these sources of the data in putting together your argument about why this policy is really a good one to promote the achieving that macroeconomic objective. And of course, make your references explicit. Importantly, no need for diagrams. Okay, so it's just a waste of time. Don't draw diagrams because it's not needed. And I'm telling you that yes, you can get 10 marks even if you only write 1 page in that box. It is enough space. So don't worry, it's not like you have to write 3 pages and otherwise you wouldn't get close to full marks. Finally, here's the description. We are out of time a bit, so I'm going to put the chat back on in a second. The response identifies and fully explains the appropriate policy. You see, identification and explanation. You also use the relevant economic theory effectively, use the terminology well, and information from the text and data is also not just used, but appropriate, relevant, and supports your evaluation effectively. And of course, very important, you need a balanced evaluation. If you only talk about the pros and very little about the cons, examiners will say that your answer is not balanced. So that's how you write up a balanced evaluation. My suggestion would be at least 3 of the pros, 3 of the cons, and not just mentioned, but at least a couple sentences about each. Okay, that would make a balanced evaluation. Finally, as I promised, Here are some formulas. You can also feel free to either take screenshots or later, once I put this video up, you can stop the video. I've tried to gather all the formulas that you might need in the exams. These are the ones for microeconomics. Okay, and these ones at the bottom for total revenue and so on down. That's just for higher level students. These are the macroeconomic policies. Very importantly, the GDP. Okay, please learn it well. Okay, but then we have GNI and so on. I think most of you know these formulas, but nevertheless, it's all here, and I hope that these help. And finally, for the global, we don't have that many for the global. Of course, there could be diagrams asked, but that's basically a different scenario. We don't have formulas for there. You just need to be able to read the diagram and calculate changes in expenditures, revenues, and so on. Okay, with that said, we have gone through all of what I wanted to cover in this session. Thank you very much for joining in. Let me just open up the chat. And those students who attend my exam revision crash course, we also get access to this board. Here we go. Let me just see. I'm new to live, as I said. Let's see if I can adjust the, here we go, the live chat so that I can answer some of your questions. So live chat turned on. This time you can ask me questions even about the content. I'm very happy to answer them. I'm going to stay here for roughly half an hour if it's okay. And I see that over 90 students are here. So if you have any questions, I think you should be able. There we go. I had one. Okay. So first question, are there specified diagrams for paper 2? Well, if you paid attention, I was showing you those. Let me just show it again. Specified diagrams for paper 2. To the best of my knowledge, these are the diagrams that could be coming up in paper 2. I tried to check these very carefully. Make sure you know the XCs, the labels, I mean, for all of these topics. For example, demand and supply questions mean that you should be aware of what could drive demand up or down. Same thing with supply. So the non-price determinants of demand, supply, you should be able to know. Okay, so these are the questions or the diagrams that could be coming up in paper 2. Let me look at the next one. Will this video be uploaded on your YouTube channel? Yes, please subscribe. Oops, that's my chair going down. Please subscribe. And so once I upload it, there's going to be, and if you hit that bell icon, I think, if I'm uploading it, you're going to get a notification. So yes, firstly, thank for this little workshop. Okay, you're welcome. Thank you very much for coming, by the way. I'm humbled by the amount of students who have come. Thank you so much. Then for paper 1, do you recommend us to focus on one unit and learn it by heart? So essentially choose which questions we will answer before entering the exam. I wouldn't recommend that completely. Or if you decide to do so, then I suggest what you just said. Like you have to learn it by heart, like everything. Because if you don't learn everything in that question, like in that, let's say, microeconomics, then you might get a question that you are not prepared for, and then it's not going to be easy for you to answer your question, to answer the exams. So my suggestion would be to focus on one of the sections for sure for your paper 1. If I were a standard level student, I would go for micro, because as I've shown you, there are quite a few, just a few topics that they can literally ask you from. If I was doing a higher level exam, maybe I would go for macro, but that's not to say that I would only study for that, because anyways, in your paper 2, paper 3, you're going to get other questions from all parts of the syllabus. So I would never say that you should only just study one section for your paper 1. Just to be on the safe side, I would also go through the other sections that you're not focusing that much on. I hope that answered your question. Right. I'm getting a lot of questions. What would market power be a prevalent topic in any of the papers? Yeah, I guess this question is about, can I leave it out, right? So that's the usual question. Is it okay to leave out the theory of the firm? I would say you shouldn't leave out the theory of the firm. It cannot come up in paper 2. That's right. But it's likely coming up in paper 3. And also there's a very high chance of the microeconomics question in paper 1 to be that. It does not have to be like that, but it does come up quite often. So if I was learning for the exams, preparing, I would go through that topic too. I can't say that you can easily leave out and still expect a 7. Okay, especially because in paper 3, you have to answer all the questions. Okay, next. You listed the topics that may come up in paper 1. Where can we locate them and what is the difference? Message retracted. Okay, it's the assessment objective 3 questions in the syllabus, okay? Glossary of subject specific terms. Are those the only definitions we will need to know, or should we stick to knowing all knowledge points from the subject guide? I don't quite get that question. So, I mean, are those the only definitions? Also, so your question is like, could there be a definition question about the term that's not included in that document? If Lumi, if that's the question, then I really don't think so. But it could be that someone who put together this glossary has made a mistake. I'm telling you, the IB can ask you anything which is in the syllabus. So that's what you should primarily focus on. I haven't checked every single term in the syllabus back to the glossary, okay? But whenever I checked something, I always found it in that glossary of terms. So I would say 99%, there's a 99% chance that yeah, you're safe with learning those definitions. It's highly unlikely. Even that circular flow, circular economy is defined there in the glossary. I checked. Okay. Next question. Could you go over Keynesian aggregate supply curve? Okay. I will, okay, in this session. I just want to answer the more general questions first. Okay, first, for paper 1, part B, and the real-world example, is there a limit for how old it can be? No. That's the short answer. My suggestion is to not go back too much in time, okay? So I know that the Great Depression is a fantastic classic example, but why would you go back to the 1930s when you can just go back to the financial crisis in time? But there is no set limit. I just know that the IB prefers more recent examples, but that's not to say that they would be able to mark you down just because you're referring to the 1970s inflation. I would be just like, why are you referring back to the 1970s for inflation when you can actually talk about what happened last year or 2 years ago? 2 years ago, the inflation rate in the US went up above 9%. Okay, I need to keep remembering the Keynesian one. Okay, can you make a video about the most common calculations in paper 3? I will try, but I can't promise. I mean, I have videos for every single thing. Okay, like I said in my revision guide, I have videos, explanations of the entire syllabus, including all the calculations. Let me very quickly show you, going back here to the balance of payments. Here's a question. In my notes, I obviously give you calculation exercises as well. This, for example, is one that standard level students would also need to know. It could come up in a paper too. So not only do I have solutions worked out as I have shown you, but I do have video explanation of how to calculate these. So that's it for now. It's very time consuming to make videos, but hopefully I will. I'll make a note. Okay, I'll make a note that that's a request to, here we go. Paper 3 videos. to solve. Okay, I can't promise, but I'll try. Could this board please be emailed to us? This board is going to be emailed to those who attend my exam revision course. But this video is going to be available to everyone, so you can watch the whole thing. I was showing everything. You can take screenshots. Will we get access to the documents you shared here? Yes. All the, not this one, but back here. Okay. If you haven't subscribed on my website, there's going to be a link at the bottom of this, in the description of this video, to sign up, and then there's going to be an automated email that will send out all of these documents, okay, including the real world example booklet, subject reports, and the glossary. Okay, next. Could this board be? Yes, yes. Is it bad to write definitions for the 50 marker? No, I didn't say that it's bad. I just said that your intro shouldn't be a list of definitions, okay? Obviously, you would need to explain things that the question is asking about, and those explanations will most likely be partially at least definitions. But the IB suggests that you have a proper thesis statement, or I suggest, not the IB, I suggest you have a proper thesis statement, okay, for your part B question of the 50 marker. And then definitions could or should appear in the body of your text when you're explaining a given economic theory. Right, next. What are the materials that we get access free of charge? All of these resources, okay? So all of these, the guide, most of these are actually available online. Like you Google them up, you'll be able to find these, okay? Plus this video is going to be free, plus this one. Okay, this is not on Google, but I'm going to send this as well for free. Right, what else? Could you please explain what is AO3 again? Yes, good question. Assessment objective 3. So back here into the IB economics guide, let me show you. Control F, I search for assessment objective 3 or AO3. Look. Oh, and I can even click on this. Here we go. Assessment objective 3 is a synthesis and evaluation. Examine economic concepts and theories. I'll say a word about examine in a sec. Use economic concepts and examples to construct and present an argument. Discuss and evaluate economic information and theories. If you look at these are the common terms that they will use for these part B questions in paper 1 or the part G question in the paper 2. Look, to construct and present, evaluate, discuss, examine. Okay, at higher level, you would need to demonstrate economic synthesis and evaluation of the extension topics. That mostly refers to, in my understanding, okay, so the policy, no, that's the policy recommendation here. That's the paper 3 question. Yeah, here it just simply says that for HL, you would need to be able to evaluate parts of the HL topics. Extension topics is the HL content. So synthesis and evaluation is what we call assessment objective 3. That's what I called evaluation in those essay responses, looking at the pros versus the cons, or long run, short run effects, stakeholder effects, or efficiency. That's what assessment objective stands for. And that's the evaluation question in part B of question 1 and part G of question of paper 2. Right, I lost track. And time is running out, so I want to show you the Keynesian. What are the materials that we need? Yes. What would you suggest is the most effective way to learn the pros and cons of different economic concepts? Well, sit down and learn them. Like in my notes, they are always separately shown, the pros and the cons. And my suggestion is to try to memorize at least 3 pros, 3 advantages, and 3 limitations of, for example, a policy. And that way you at least have something solid to structure your evaluation on. Okay. very, very quickly. Now, I don't want to waste time on that. So in my notes, I have the pros and cons. That's the best way. I mean, you have to sit down and learn. That's what you have to do. I would say at least 3 for each. Right, next up. For the incorporation of RWE, sorry, just one second. Incorporation of RWEs in essay responses, what's the depth you would recommend students know events to be, such as causality, adopted policy, then efficacy, and so on? Well, what can I say? The more detailed and fully developed the response it is, the better. To give you a bit more information of what I think about this is that if you can not only refer to the current, let's say, contractionary monetary policy that the central bank of the US is into, the Fed, right? It's okay to know that since 2022, they have been carrying out contractionary monetary policy. If you state that, that's already a real world example, and it's true. But to develop it fully would mean that this is in response to inflation that turned out not to be transitory and that has gone up to 9.1% in July 2022, in response to which the Fed has increased interest rates from 0.25 to above 5. Okay, you don't have to know that currently the interest rate corridor is roughly at 5.5%. If you know it, that it was down close to 0% and they have increased it to above 5%, that's enough. That's a more developed real world example here. And then you explain that with such a high increase in the base interest rate, this means market interest rates are also likely to increase together with the interests on loans, obviously. Those are the market interest rates, which will then ideally reduce aggregate demand, or at least stop AD from growing too much and therefore reduce inflation, like we know by now that inflation has reduced below 4% in the US since last year. So that would be a fully developed real world example. Okay. And then, of course, you could talk about the negative aspects of this, that it could increase the unemployment. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, testified in front of Congress, and he was asked whether this could lead to more unemployment. And he said yes. So that also kind of supports the argument that indeed contractionary policies could lead to higher unemployment. And if you can know some things like this, okay, you don't have to remember the name, but if you can actually say that the chairman also acknowledged that this could lead to higher unemployment, then you are connecting the economic theory with what's actually occurring in the real world. I hope you get this. So that's the kind of depth that I would go into, but you don't have to remember the 9.1% that I was talking about, okay? Roughly 9%, if you remember that, that's okay. Just don't say inflation in the US went up to 25%, okay? Because that would be very much off. Okay. Could you please send the presentation on the email, please? Yes, I will send the link. So once this is uploaded, I will send this out as a link, okay, to everyone. And yeah. Hi, thanks for this. Do you have any documents with every policy? I don't know how to pick a policy and I'm scared I don't know them all. Look, I'm not sure of what policies you're talking about. If it's macroeconomics, it's not very difficult. It's just fiscal, monetary, and then supply side. By the way, this is a message to everyone. Do learn all of these policies very well. Fiscal, monetary, and supply side policies, together with the evaluation, they can come very, very useful in a part B question, because even if the question is focusing on, let's say, how effective fiscal policy is in bringing down unemployment, let's say, even then you can make use of your knowledge about monetary policy, right? Monetary policy was also used roughly 10 years ago in the US to bring unemployment down, and it was pretty effective. Okay, so those policies for macro are the ones to learn. Okay, you can also, of course, go into the inequality in the income distribution policies, but those three are the major policies that usually are coming up. Next. Can you briefly explain again the assessment objectives? And for example, for SL paper 1, we only need to know those AO35 topics. Yes, in my understanding. You can check, look, please check the whole guide. I went through the whole thing, and those were the only 5 topics that I saw assessment objective 3 for. Nothing else. So in my view, that's the only thing that they can ask. Briefly explain the assessment objectives. Well, they are here. Take a screenshot, okay? I'll go up. But by the way, if you open up the IB Economics Guide, it's page, let me show you, page 17. You don't see it now, but here we go. Page 17. Page 17 has all the assessment objectives. Okay, AO4, AO3, AO2, and AO1. And then in the syllabus section, for every single question, let me just go down here. It's going to say which ones they are looking for. Okay, knowledge and understanding is most usually about the definitions. Application analysis could include that's the explanation questions, especially the 10 marker in part A, and then the AO4 is more about the calculations. To the best of my understanding, produce well structured written material using yes, concept produce, use diagrams, appropriate extracts from news media, interpret appropriate data sets, and use quantitative techniques to identify, explain. You see, quantitative techniques, it's calculations. Okay, that's that. And then we have questions 1. Okay, if for part 1 or paper 1, part A, we draw a graph and also need to draw it in part B. You don't need to. Do we redraw it, or can we just like refer back? Yes, you can. Yes, please. Don't waste your time. Like, you've already drawn the diagram, you have perhaps, hopefully, explained it as well. So refer back to the diagram and also refer back to your explanation. How many diagrams should I use in a 15-mark question? I cannot tell. There is no set rule. Check the assessed student work. I have seen part B questions with 5 diagrams, scoring very high marks, obviously, but it's not to say that if you draw 5 diagrams, you will then get 15 marks, right? So 1, 2 could be potentially enough. It's how you're making use of the diagrams. That's more important than how many diagrams you have. Okay, and so, lots of questions. Guys, I can't go through all of these questions, but I did promise to have a look at the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. I said that I'll stay here for roughly half an hour. Let me just, if you are interested in my explanation, then I'm showing it to you right now. If you feel like you know it well, then I'm saying goodbye to you. Thank you very much for coming to this free session. And I'm going to email all these resources to you in a couple of hours, so hopefully today, to everyone. Those who are interested in my explanation of the Keynesian aggregate supply curve, let me just get there very quickly and explain why it has a horizontal section. Many students don't understand. I feel like sometimes that many teachers don't understand. So, variations of economic activity is the topic, and in my notes, I'm happy to talk a little bit about this. It all starts with Mr. Keynes, pretty much the most famous 20th century economist who has helped the US get out of the Great Depression. And so the Keynesian model of the aggregate supply curve has 3 sections because of the wage or price downward inflexibility and different levels of spare capacity in the economy. Basically, what happened is that he checked data points, and he saw back in time that wages, not necessarily the average price level, but he was looking at the wages. And let me just adjust the diagram. So wages didn't really go down too much, even if there was a huge recession. And that's basically why the data points, because in real life we don't have curves. These curves are theoretical models. What we can actually measure in real life is the real GDP data and average price level data. And those will give us data points. And then we can kind of concur that, or understand that, okay, 80 must have shifted down. Okay. So looking at the data points, he saw that when real GDP was falling a lot, wages have not really fallen a lot. And that's the basis of this whole aggregate supply curve, that according to Keynes, even if the economy is doing really, really bad, wages don't usually go down. And honestly, you don't even need to know the diagram at first. You just need to understand what I'm saying here. And that says here that when aggregate demand falls, you need to understand the story in the background. When aggregate demand falls, there's lower revenues for all the firms in the economy, okay, on average. Let's simplify it like that. Therefore, firms who have lower revenues need to cut the costs, and they would love to they would love to cut the wages, but they cannot simply cut wages. They cannot tell to their workers that, guys, I'm sorry, but from tomorrow on, everyone is getting 20% less. Why? Because of the minimum wage laws. If you have a factory with all the workers on the minimum, then you cannot cut their wages legally, at least. Okay? So your hands are tied. Also, workers have contracts. So whenever you have a job, and if it's a legal job, then you have a contract with your employer. In that contract, there is a number, that's your wage. And the company has undertaken to pay you that much money. They cannot just one-sidedly cut down your wage, right? They have to sit down with you, renegotiate your agreement, and perhaps if you sign it, then from tomorrow on you can get a lower wage, right? But you can't really do that if you are a multinational corporation spread across 60 countries with 100,000 workers. You can't start sitting down with every single employee and renegotiate a deal. It's much, much simpler to just lay off a given percentage of the workers instead of starting to lower the wages by a given percentage, because people just don't usually accept that. Okay. And you cannot legally, without renegotiating a contract, cut down someone's wage, okay? Because then they can go to the court and they're going to win. Also, labor union power. So if you have strong labor union power and you are a company and you want to reduce the wages, they will just go on a strike and you will make an even larger loss for your company. So for all these reasons, companies during recessions tend to lay off the workers, and that's how they cut the costs instead of cutting down the wages. So wages are not going down, they are rigid, so to say, downwards. That's what we call wage rigidity or downward inflexibility. So that's why it's easier to fire workers. It's better to say lay off, okay, in an exam. And so in a demand deficient recession, when aggregate demand is falling, the unemployment is going to go up because all these people have lost their jobs. That's what we call cyclical unemployment. And as there's less workers now employed, there's lower real output. That means less GDP due to the fall in aggregate demand. But the average price level doesn't really change much downwards. Why? Because those workers who have not been laid off are still getting the exact same wages as before. So the cost of production per unit is pretty much the same. If you have sent away half of your workers, but you're also producing just half as much as before, then the output that you produce still costs you the same per unit, because those who you haven't laid off are still working for you at the same wage as they used to before. Right. Therefore, there's going to be a horizontal section, and that's what I'm showing here in the Keynesian diagram, that if aggregate demand is falling, we must have some kind of a horizontal part connecting point A and B to show that GDP is falling down a lot, and yet the average price level is not really going down too much, because companies cannot really afford to sell their goods at much lower prices. Why is all that? It's all true according to Keynes, because as opposed to the monetarists, he says that wages are not going to be flexible, even if a long time goes by. The wages and resource prices are not flexible, and that's the key here for the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. That's why it's different from the monetarist model. In the monetarist model, resource prices are flexible, and if they are flexible, it means the short-run aggregate supply in the long run will just adjust, and the economy will always return back to the full employment level of output in the monetarist model. Not so much here in the Keynesian. Why? Because according to Keynes, resource prices, especially wages, are not flexible, not even in the long term. Hence, if AD falls down from AD1 to AD2, real GDP will be at Y2. The average price level will be very similar to where it used to be, maybe a little bit of deflation, and the economy is going to get stuck there unless aggregate demand is boosted back up. That's why we have a horizontal section, because at Y2 we have a lot of spare capacity, and it will not automatically get solved by the economy as suggested in the monetarist view, where resource prices are flexible and simply resource prices just go down and then production goes back up. That's what the monetarists say. According to Keynes, that's not going to occur. That's why we have a horizontal section of the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. But beyond the full employment level, as you can see, it becomes vertical. In that case, they completely agree with the monetarists, meaning that more aggregate demand will lead to much higher costs of production. And so they kind of agree that if you go beyond the full employment level of output in your economy, further increases in aggregate demand will most likely just cause inflation, but not much increase in the average price level. Right. I hope that this is a clear, short explanation and it made it clear to you. So that at the heart of it all is that resource prices, according to Keynes, are not flexible, not even in the long term, whereas they are very flexible in the monetarist view. Let me just show you one more diagram down here from my notes. You see, the red dots are the fluctuations in economic activity in the monetarist model, but these are all temporary fluctuations. In the long run, we are always back at YFE. Right. With all that said, I see that there are roughly 30 students still here. Thank you very much for attending this workshop. As I said earlier on, I'm going to email you these resources that I was sharing with you. And for everyone, even if you don't want to come to the exam revision crash course and you feel you don't need my revision notes, which is perfectly fine, I'm wishing you all the very best for your IB economics studies. And especially for those who have the exams, I'm wishing you all the very, very best for your IB exams, not just economics, but of course, definitely economics as well. And if you still happen to have questions later on, feel free to message me, email me. I will also be available not only on my Discord channel, but in the big one, the unofficial IBO Discord channel. You'll be able to find me. Thank you very much again, and I'm going to say goodbye for now. Ciao.